it's hard. As human beings, we want to control certain things, but I think it's just really trying to be honest with yourself and saying, hey, let me focus on what I can control, which is how I communicate with people, how I love people, all of those different things, and then let the rest kind of put that in God's hands. Because honestly, that's the best place you can put it, is if he loves them more than you even love them, which could be very much.
Yeah.
That's really the best place that you can leave that in. And then allowing your relationship with God to say, okay, I have faith that you are working for this person, and I'm going to let you work for this person, and have confidence that you will do those things.
Hello, I'm Xander, and this is the Days Before You podcast. It hurts when you see someone in pain, and is made all the more difficult when you don't know how to help them. In unfortunate cases, the source of this pain comes from church members. While some of their actions may be well-intentioned, the results can be painful or even traumatic within an individual. Personally, I know friends who have been so hurt by the church, they have walked away, and some don't want to be involved in religion at all. As Christians, is there anything we can do to alleviate this pain? What are some practical tools we can use to help those hurt by church members? Today we have Brandon Grentz. He is the Counseling Services Coordinator at Southern Adventist University, and he's here to give us some insight to hopefully help those hurt by the church. So, hello, welcome, Brandon.
Thank you so much for having me.
No,
Glad
of course,
to be here
yes. So, can we get on the same page before we start? Can
Sure.
you help define what church trauma or church hurt actually means?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say church hurt or church trauma would be those individuals who have been affected by church members or anyone who's representing the church, to a point most likely where it's caused significant damage. So sometimes that could be, as you said before, they stop coming to church altogether. It could be that they're holding a lot of anger or bitterness towards someone in the church that has hurt them. And so I guess that would be my definition of what church hurt is. So it's very specifically people that experience spiritual trauma who have a very adverse reaction to spiritual things, or people within the church who might have done things that have hurt them, I think.
So those who have been hurt are clearly in a lot of pain, a lot of turmoil, maybe questioning or like being angry or first. All of these emotions are just bubbling and kind of trapped. How do people, people on the outside, seeing that happen to somebody, how do we approach them? How do we support them?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I guess I would start with how do we, like you said, how do we see someone who's been hurt by the church? And I guess part of identifying who's been hurt by the church would be just being intentional about looking for them. So, like I said, I feel like there's a lot of different contexts that could happen, but perhaps maybe it's someone who has been coming to church for a while, and then you start to notice that they haven't been there. Or maybe it's in having a conversation with someone, you just notice that they're a lot more defensive about a certain topic, or they're more defensive about a certain person, or maybe they're just telling you exactly what happened, where maybe they had a disagreement with someone, or someone did something that was very hurtful to their relationship with God or their view of God or the church. So that takes intentionality. I think that takes, noticing that when people are there, so that you can notice when they aren't, or you can just find differences in how they're acting. It's kind of looking for, I guess, those telltale signs that someone's been hurt,
Mm-hmm.
We're just reiterating kind of those things I said, where maybe they're more defensive. Maybe they aren't coming to church anymore. Maybe they're just expressing to you that they're feeling angry or hurt or upset. And then really just kind of listening to how that happened is a good place to start too.
So let's start listening just to give them that time.
Yeah.
To, availability, I guess.
Yeah, because I think that a lot of times when people are hurt, not always, but I think a lot of times when people are hurt, they want to talk about it with someone who's safe. I think in my experience, a lot of people have wanted to get things off their chest or maybe just vent. And so I think it's good if you can be a safe place for people to come to and vent, and just be able to listen to maybe what happened. Because I think that the first part of understanding why they're hurt or what exactly happened is just listening to understand where they're coming from, rather than listening to respond. Because I think sometimes we might get into the habit of, myself included, being defensive or trying to, you know, look at both sides of the situation. But I think first it starts with just, let me just listen to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. So that definitely makes sense. That, you know, that reliability being there for them. What if, are there any situations you would say that like the opposite might be true, where you just need to give them space or like give them like, you know, so how would you identify like those different situations?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Sometimes people might want space and they might not want to talk to you about it. And so I think that it's important in those situations to take the lead of the person who you're having the conversation with. You know, you could, again, if it's someone that you have a relationship with, you could go ask them, hey, I noticed that you haven't been coming to church in a couple weeks. What's been going on? But I think the difference is that you have a relationship with that person already. If you don't have a relationship, sometimes it can be hard. They might not necessarily want to share with you right away, which is understandable. And so I think it's good to just take the lead of the person that you're trying to talk to, and just understanding, or maybe trying to relate to a time where you felt really hurt by somebody, recognizing that everyone responds to those things differently. So I guess for me, sometimes I'll actually just straight up ask people like, hey, what do you need from me here? Do you want to talk about it? If you don't, just know that I'm here for you. And I think that honestly, a lot of people just want to know that someone is available to them, and then let them kind of talk to you or do whatever they need to do on their own terms. It's a good thing to do.
Yeah. Going off that, do you feel like there's ever a time where like you want to help somebody, but you understand and realize you might not be the best person for them to help?
Yes. No, that's a good observation as well, as I think that certain people are put in certain places to be able to help them. So you're right. Like sometimes there might be an instance where, man, I really want to help this person, or maybe it could be I want to help this person, but I'm the one that actually hurt them. And it could have been unintentional. Hopefully it wasn't intentional. I think in most cases it's not, but there are times where it might be. But I think it is just trying to analyze the situation and say, yeah, you know what? I might not be the best person to talk to them in this situation. Or I've known sometimes with different people, if it's too close to their own pain or their own hurts, sometimes they're like, I want to be there for them, but I don't know if I can be there for them in this specific way. So part of it is, I guess, trying to set up those boundaries within yourself to say, you know, am I the right person to help them? And then if I can't, just letting them know, hey, this is how I can be there for you. And then this is maybe areas where I want to be there for you, but if I can't do it, let me like find someone else who can help you, for example.
So that leads into our next question, which is, how do we identify that we are actually the ones causing hurt?
Oh, that's a good question. And again, I think it goes back to just having that intentionality of assessing yourself and your surroundings and your situation. I think, again, sometimes we can get into autopilot mode and not be intentional about looking out for other people around us. But I really think that, you know, God calls us to have relationships with other people. You know, it's having that vertical relationship, but also that horizontal relationship. And so part of that horizontal responsibility is looking at your relationships with other people and then analyzing and saying, hey, like, you know, to me, it's usually looking for differences. When you want to look for something that's gone wrong, typically it means there's differences. So typically is there a difference in how people are approaching me? Is it a difference that people aren't approaching me at all? Is there a difference in the dynamics of, you know, when I talk to people? Or do I just notice that someone is responding in a way that maybe might show that they are hurt? So again, maybe speaking to you in a more defensive way, or avoiding you more often than you had remembered before. So, but again, I think that goes into being intentional about just looking at how am I affecting other people, which takes intentionality, and it takes honestly prayer too, to say, hey, God, can you reveal to me how I'm relating with other people, and if there's anything that I need to change or that I need to ask forgiveness for, or any of those things. I think God can definitely lead us to those things, and He wants us to reconcile with those people as best we can.
Yeah. Just promoting peace and like just not having those divides and divisions that, like, you know, that just seems so much easier like this. To be so divisive, like have separation, but like we're meant, I guess, to be united together as like one, as like a whole group. But these things happen. It's like life. It's just
They do. We're imperfect people, unfortunately, and a lot of us, again, a lot of us are just dealing with different environmental. I guess we're all just dealing with different things that we also grew up with, or things in our lives, and sometimes if we're not careful, they will intersect with other people in a way that could be hurtful if we're not careful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. So let's say we're working with a person and like, they've been hurt. We're talking to them. We're available. We make ourselves available.
Yeah.
But they're still adamant that they don't want to go back to the church, either the church that hurt them or like any church in general.
Yeah.
How do we approach, should we approach them like to come back to the church at all?
Yeah, that's a big question, and something that I think sometimes we all wrestle with personally. Because like you said, I think in the beginning, you've known people who've walked away from the church. I know I've known people who've been hurt and walked away from the church. And so, yeah, I think it touches all of us in some aspect. And so your question was, how do we kind of approach that, or should we approach that? So I think first off, the best thing you can do is just starting with, like I said, listening to the person if you're in a position to, and really trying to understand where they're coming from. So to me, it starts with empathy, which means putting yourself in their perspective, taking their perspective. And even if you don't agree with it, trying to say, a good question that I like to ask is, how did you come to that conclusion? Because that's a question that leads me to try to listen to understand where they're coming from, rather than to make assumptions or to try to defend my position. Because I think someone needs to be heard before they can even consider coming back, or before they can even consider starting to try to heal from some of those wounds. So I think a good place to start is to really try to listen to the person, empathize with what it is that has hurt them. Like, for example, I heard Ty Gibson once, he talked about how he approached someone who was atheist, and he was, instead of trying to convince him of what his faith was, he listened to him first and said, you don't believe in God? And he said, I don't believe in God either. But then he said, tell me about the God you don't believe in. And when he listened to him, he said, well, yeah, this God is tyrannical, like ego, power hungry, just absolutely unfair and unjust. And so he said, you're right. Like, I don't believe in that God either. And so it's cool because he started from a place of understanding and like common ground, rather than starting at two different positions. So I think sometimes if we approach someone of, hey, like, how has the church hurt you? Because there have been very real examples of people who I've heard have been very hurt by the church. And so when you first listen and understand how have they been hurt, you can sit with them in a place of, wow, like, you're right, that was very wrong, or that shouldn't have happened, or that's not a good representation of who God is or who the church is, and I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. But if you start there, that's usually, in my experience, where healing can start. And as you seek to understand rather than convince them, a lot of times your life and your testimony and how you're reacting to those things can be one of the best arguments, even over trying to just logically, argue someone back or try to forcefully just convince them. Because a lot of people just want to be heard and seen and loved. And if you do that, it's like the Bible says, if Jesus says, if I am lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. So if you're lifting Jesus up and Jesus lives in you and through you, people will see that and hopefully make the choice to start coming back or start healing from that. And ultimately, that's what we want, people to heal.
No, of course. A lot there to unpack, but I want to, if we can go back a little bit, to simplify some points. I mean, just to, like, again, foundational things, like, can we just go and define, what does empathy look like? How do you do that, demonstrate that to somebody else?
Sure. I think the easiest way to put a definition of what empathy is just to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So, again, if someone's been hurt, that's practically listening to how they've been hurt and imagining or putting yourself in their perspective and saying, wow, how would it feel if I was hurt the same way that they were? Or how would I feel if someone, came up to me and told me you shouldn't be doing this, and they did it in a hurtful way? And that connects you by, if you can relate to a time in your life where you were hurt by somebody, you can then connect that with what they're telling you. And now you start in a place of connection rather than not necessarily hearing them or understanding. So I think the easiest way to say it is put yourself in their shoes and try to see it from their perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you build compassion to have those difficult conversations with somebody that you know that could trigger them or could do anything? How do you approach that situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that you have to just, again, be speaking with intentionality, and make sure that you are considering the other person when you're talking to them. Because, I think people have good intentions a lot of times when maybe they think, okay, this is a truth that I know from Christianity or the church, and I'm trying to now basically show this other person who might not be there yet how to live the way that they feel like God is calling them to live. I again think that the approach needs to be first finding a connection, finding instead of putting this onto the other person, it's more finding that place of connection. It's finding that place of common ground and starting there. So, again, kind of like my last example where I talked about how Ty Gibson was sharing a story, and he's a pastor who was sharing a story on how he related to someone who was atheist by saying, wow, I agree. I wouldn't believe in a God that was this way either. But what if there was a God who was like this, and this? And let me tell you about this God that I believe in. So I think that the best way you can share those kinds of things is more just sharing how that's impacted your life. And the more that you just simply lead people to Jesus, those other things will start to change in people's lives as they get to know him. But I think part of that's just not taking the place of the Holy Spirit and leading them to Jesus and letting Jesus change their hearts, change their lives. We can do that by sharing how that's been beneficial in our lives. And I think we can do that by modeling that in our own lives. And eventually, if people see the benefits of that, then they'll have more of a desire to want to do that as well. But rarely does it ever work where you just try to give someone a principle without relationship first. So again, it's having a relationship first. The other things then follow the relationship piece. But sometimes I think people might flip it around, and I've seen it cause a lot of hurt when they flip the principles before the relationship. It's kind of like, I guess, if you will, for a second, if you think about marriage, some people joke even in the secular world, like, oh, the old ball and chain, marriage can be just a set of rules. It's restrictive. You're only marrying one person the rest of your life. Why not be able to date around or do other things? And again, if you put it in the context of, it's just rules without relationship, that would be maybe bad. But if you ask almost anyone who's in a happy marriage, the fact that they love the person makes them want to do those things. So I think that that's kind of a good kind of representation of how, if you have a relationship with people and you're connected with God, then those things will also flow from that, from sharing those things in your life. Rather than just coming at it of, hey, you really should be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that. If it's just a set of rules without any kind of relationship, then there's no motivation to do anything about it.
Yeah, coming from a place of love and caring for the other person. How do you practice showing that love or being compassionate towards others like that?
Yeah, I think you can practice showing love to others by, again, just creating relationships. And churches, honestly, that's a good way to do that. Getting involved in your church and saying, hey, how can I help others? Can I be a greeter? There's so many different roles you can be at church or even outside of church. Can I check in with my friends? Can I constantly be thinking of other people and how I affect those people, and wanting to make sure that the effects are positive. So, and I also think that it starts with, honestly, loving yourself and taking care of yourself. And so that's another thing too. If you're constantly giving, but never really loving and appreciating and taking care of yourself, you're going to have nothing left to give other people. So I think it starts with taking care of yourself, and then in taking care of yourself, setting yourself up into a better position to then take care of other people. But I think, again, where we want to practice compassion and loving others is first being filled ourselves with devotions and, just learning about how good God is. And then that just makes me really want to show love and compassion to other people, because if you have something good, you wouldn't want to necessarily just keep it to yourself. You want to share it with other people. So I think the more that you experience that good relationship with Jesus, the more that makes you want to share it with other people as well. And God gives us very good practical examples in the Bible of how you can help others and how you can be there for others. But again, it starts with just thinking about how you can listen to someone, how you can reach out to someone and just encourage them with kind words. It could be, whatever your talent is or something that you feel like you're good at, using that to encourage other people and help other people can be a good way to start. Because I think it looks different for everybody, how you do that.
Sometimes we hear the phrase, love them to Jesus, which is the idea that we develop relationships with people with the goal and hope that they come to our church and get closer to God. But is that disingenuous? Like, how do we make sure that our relationships are acting from a place of selflessness?
Yeah, that's a great question because, again, I think that can be really subtle. If you're trying to, I guess, have ulterior motives is what you're trying to stay away from. So I guess the question, how can we remain selfless in that? And I think that ultimately that comes down to, again, checking your intentions. So again, all of this is being intentional. So it's looking inward to say, okay, what is motivating my relationship here? Now, obviously, when we have a relationship with someone and we're hoping that it brings them to church, that's fine if that's a byproduct of the relationship. But if the relationship has the end goal of only bringing them to church, and if that doesn't happen, then you have somehow failed, I think then you missed the point. So I think it's really trying to keep the focus on, I'm having this relationship with this other person, and I'm, again, like loving them to Jesus, but then allowing them to still keep their freedom of choice and also keeping your intentions in check to say, do I have ulterior motives here? Or is this being selfish because I ultimately want them to choose this rather than something else? Now, obviously, we do want people to choose Jesus because we know how good it can be and how life-giving that can be. But again, I think as long as the relationship is our end goal, period, whether they come to church or not, that keeps it selfless. Again, I think that them coming to church or knowing God, if that's a good byproduct, and I think that that's, again, more the Holy Spirit and God's role, whether they come to church or not. He's always working on their hearts. Like, as much as we love those people, he loves them so much more. I think if we focus on our relationship with them, that can have good effects, but it shouldn't be that the relationships is a means to an end. We should really want to just strengthen that relationship, and then we can still hope that they come to church, but not still leave the choice in their hands, I think is a good way to approach that.
Yeah. So how would you say we can help ourselves to be more honest with, like, because I feel like for me personally, sometimes like my own mind can convince me of like the wrong things, and it's like in those times it's like I fully believe the wrong things. How do we help those, like, be honest with ourselves?
Be honest with ourselves, like, in what sense?
Like you're saying, like, to identify like if we have any ulterior motives with people.
Okay.
Like, how do we make sure that we haven't just convinced ourselves that we are doing the right thing when we actually aren't?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Like, how, because sometimes our mind can trick us or those kinds of things. So it's true. I think part of that goes into having potentially conversations with other people. Sometimes we can gain different perspectives. Like, hey, like, can you help me here? Have you noticed anything in my relationship with this other person that maybe is a red flag? Or, and I think a lot of that too is just communing with God and saying, like, hey, God, like, keep my intentions pure, like, help me to have your motives and not my own. And I think that that's hard because, I mean, even the Bible itself, there's times where it says that, the heart is deceitful, like it can kind of trick us, like you said. But I think it's just really trying to be honest with yourself and asking yourself those questions. What is my end goal? Or would I be okay if this person chose something that I didn't want them to? Because then I think that's that fine line that we're on is, are you putting your intentions and your motives above someone else's? Because, I mean, as much as we want to fight for someone, it's kind of like that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. We can do all of that we can control, but we have to let things outside of us and our control stay outside of our control. Because I think it's hard as human beings. We want to control certain things, but I think it's just really trying to be honest with yourself and saying, hey, let me focus on what I can control, which is how I communicate with people, how I love people, all of those different things. And then let the rest kind of put that in God's hands. Because honestly, that's the best place you can put it, is if he loves them more than you even love them, which could be very much.
Yeah.
That's really the best place that you can leave that in. And then allowing your relationship with God to say, okay, I have faith that you are working for this person, and I'm going to let you work for this person, and have confidence that you will do those things.
Yeah. Just trust that he will do what he will do.
Having that trust in him. Yeah.
Yeah. So if the people who we're talking with, they want to go back to church, but they don't necessarily want to go back to the church that has hurt them, how do we approach? Do we just take them to a different church? Do we ask them to just push through and ask for forgiveness at the church? Or how do we approach that?
Yeah, no, and I think that it's important to kind of let them lead, at least at first, what their end goal is. What do they think healing would look like for them? Ultimately, I do feel like forgiveness is the end goal. But sometimes we have to work with people to get there. So sometimes it's okay, well, how can I support you? So for me, it's also just straight up asking someone, how can I help you? Or what do you feel like you need from me to start that healing process? Because honestly, like you said, people might have different ways that they want people to be there for them. And I can't know that or read their minds unless I absolutely talk to them or ask them that. So it might seem kind of awkward to ask someone, what do you feel like you need from me? But I think that's, if you don't know and you're going off of an assumption, just go straight to the source and ask them, hey, I care about you and I want to be there for you. How can I be there for you? Because if we try to be there for someone in the way we think they need us, but it's actually not, again, we can be someone who's hurting them.
Yeah.
So I think that it's good to go straight to the source and say, how can I help you reconcile or heal? And you can definitely give them encouragement along the way of saying, I think that forgiveness would be a good end goal, but first is starting, with what are some of the first steps we can take. Because if you go too far to the end goal without going on the first step with them, you might be going a little too fast. So a lot of it is just asking them how you can be there for them.
So as a church who has hurt people, how can they be proactive in trying to seek them out and trying to heal or reconcile with those persons?
Yeah, I think that it comes down to having humility to understand that we're not perfect. And so it takes some humility to say, you know what, I messed up or I made a mistake. Or even if you feel like you didn't necessarily, do anything wrong, if you have hurt someone, whether it's intentional or unintentional, I think it's still something that Christ asks us to do, is to still, try to go to them and mend what might have been broken. So I think that goes into having some humility, looking into yourself and saying, you know what, is there a possibility that I'm seeing this wrong? Or is there a responsibility that I have to this person who I have hurt? I think at least acknowledging that the person was affected by you in a negative way can go a long way, especially if it's genuine. I mean, if it's ingenuine, it's going to be worthless. Yeah. So I think that it's just having the humility to say, can we have a conversation to go to the person who's been hurt and say, hey, we're so sorry that you've been hurt by anything that we've done. Is there a way we can reconcile? And I know when it comes to individual people in the church too, I always like to kind of refer them back to the Matthew 18 principle, which kind of talks about, dealing with conflict, which typically it's, the person goes to the other person and has a conversation if there's been a dispute among them. And then if that doesn't work or they're not listening, then you go with one other person. And then if that doesn't work, you can go to the elders or other things. So it's kind of laid out in Matthew 18 how you can start one-on-one. If that doesn't work, bring someone else who can mediate. But I think that there's processes that you can definitely go through, but ultimately it does start with just having humility to say, we're not perfect. And admitting your mistakes can be huge. or at least admitting, hey, I can see the effect I had on this person, and that was not my intended effect that I wanted to have on those people, can go a really, really long way.